Okay. So, hello to everybody out there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We apologize for some of the technical difficulties that got us off to a late start, but I'm here with Dr. Rana Dajani, and I'm so excited to have the opportunity to host this webinar for the completers of the Fundamentals of Project Management course that just ended this week. This is an exclusive opportunity, and we're really excited to have you join us live. For those that might watch later, welcome. To give a little bit of context, my name is Mark Goldstein, and I am a Senior Associate of Community at Philanthropy University. And I'm here today with Dr. Rana Dajani, who is a molecular biologist by trade, and whose organization, We Love Reading, is featured in the project management course. We're so excited to have her here today to share a little bit of insight about her background and work, to answer some of your questions about project management. And yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Dajani, for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to meet with the people who took the course and to interact and share information and learn from them as well.
Of course. So for those of you who are joining us live, feel free to submit questions as we go in the live chat. And I think we can get right into it. So Dr. Dajani, could you start by introducing yourself a little bit more to some of the learners who are joining us, and tell us specifically about some of the experience you have on this topic, on project management, because we know you have a wealth of experience in a whole lot of things, but I'd love to hear a little bit about your entry point into this specific subject.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. As mentioned before, my profession is a molecular biologist, a scientist. I'm a professor at the university, but at the same time, I realize that our role goes beyond our labs and classrooms. And if we have skill or knowledge, we should use them to serve our community. And if we can identify a challenge, to help them solve that challenge. And that's how my journey started with social entrepreneurship. When I set up the program, which today is called We Love Reading, and it came from a feeling of responsibility towards my community. So I started off as a novice with this feeling that I have to do something, that knowledge is responsibility, and I owed it to the children in my community. And I started small, developing the program in a kind of human-centered design fashion without knowing it, until I got it off and running and then created an NGO. And that's when I wanted to be able to keep on funding the program under the umbrella of this nonprofit organization. And usually in social entrepreneurship, what you do is you start applying for grants. And so you run into the project kind of model of running a program you've developed under the guise of a project funded by a donor. And that's when I got introduced into project management and kind of learned on the ground by trial and error, which is the best way, actually, until where we are today. We have a big organization. It's in 55 countries, but we're still learning all the time.
That's great. Thank you for that introduction. I think your story is one that resonates with a lot of our learners who feel this vocation to do something in their communities and to help create change, and many of whom go on to start their organizations or work for social impact organizations. And I think a skill that is pretty ubiquitous, it applies to almost everybody who does this sort of work in some capacity, is project management. And of course, that is the course that our learners who joined us live just completed. And I'd love to ask you some questions that drill down into this skill and some best practices and lessons learned from your experience in this area.
Great. Please go ahead.
Perfect. So I want to start by asking about the beginning of a new project. So if you can think about your experience, when you're right at the beginning of a new project, What are some of the most important factors to consider? So, what is your approach to the initial stage of a project to make sure that it begins in a way that sets it up for success?
So first of all, there's like three main points. One, what are the action items that we need to carry out in order to conduct this project? Two, what are the timeline for those activities? And third, who is going to be responsible to carry out these various activities? And who oversees the various people carrying out those activities? So those are the 3 points that I always start with. And when I hire somebody to be in charge of the project, to do the project management, the most important thing for that person is that I need to make clear to that person the bigger picture. Where are we going? What is the purpose, not just of the project, but of the whole program itself? How do we stay focused while implementing the project at the same time?
That's great. Those are some really concrete aspects to think about. I think if you think about an example of a project that you worked on that went really, really well, what were some of the factors that made it so successful? Could you tell us a little bit about what contributed to the success?
Yeah, so one of the projects that we really succeeded was because I chose the right project manager. And when I mean the right project manager, not that they only had the right skill set, but most importantly is that they had the right mindset. And the question then becomes, how do you create the right mindset in somebody you hire who has the right qualifications? And it's about engaging with that person, explaining to them, taking their hand and walking the walk, so that they live the spirit of the organization, the spirit of the program, and then you hand them over the specific project that they're in charge of. But you have to make sure that they are aligned with the organization going forward. And that was what made the project successful, is because the person I hired was able to grasp the bigger picture. And one other thing to help that person is that I would do things with that person hand in hand, kind of like giving that person baby steps until I felt confident that they could continue by themselves, and then gave them full autonomy to go on when I felt comfortable that they were really representing the organization and the goals and the spirit and the vision and the mission of the organization.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I love the distinction you made between mindset and skill set and how both are really important. It seems like that's a really crucial aspect of a successful organization and the talent it brings on board. In thinking about an example of a project that was less successful, so something that you may have been a part of or that you led, whether at We Love Reading or elsewhere, what are some of the factors that contributed to a project that wasn't successful? What are some of the common pitfalls that you can speak to that our learners might be able to avoid when they are working on their projects?
So, and we're talking, of course, from the perspective of project management, right? Because
Yes.
there's pitfalls everywhere in different aspects. So, just focusing on that aspect, I think, first of all, I don't consider anything a failure. That's my policy. It's what I learn. It's a learning experience, right? So you learned how not to do it that way, and so it's a positive rather than a negative experience. So one of the things where initially there was some, let's say, hampering the progress of the project was we hired a project manager who, back to the point I made earlier, had the very good skill set on paper and even, I'm sure, in function, but she didn't have the right mindset. So she wasn't sold on to the vision and mission, and the reason this program, this organization existed. And that makes the whole difference for a project to succeed or not to succeed, especially when we're talking about social enterprises or social entrepreneurship. These kinds of projects are not business projects where you have a set of deliverables and you just tick them off and you meet your whatever goals. Social work, social projects is much more deeper, much more empathetic. And if that project manager is not on board and can't wait to get out of the office, then that's not the right person. the job. And that's what happened with us. And then later that person left, thankfully, by themselves, realizing that they were not in the right place. And then we were able to find somebody who was committed and had a good skill set as well.
That's really helpful, and that's great insight. And I love the way that you framed it about, there's no failures, just opportunities to learn. And thinking more about, you've talked about hiring project managers, and I know that many of our learners are seeking careers in project management for social impact organizations. What are some, other than the right mindset, which you've talked about, what are some of the concrete skills and experiences that you might look for in hiring a project manager that our learners might be able to start building after their progress in our course?
Very important is having the skills that enable you to do good documentation, have a good reporting system in place, and have a good accountability. Because if you don't have that, even if you have the best mindset and you were really invested, things are going to fall apart if you can't follow up with what's happening. And people are not held accountable, and not because they're not good people, but people become lax and they don't really know what's asked of them. And if you don't give them feedback, written feedback, evaluating their work going forward, they won't know if they're doing good or bad and how can they improve. And then things accumulate, and then nobody knows whose fault it is that things fell apart. So documenting, having a reporting system and accountability system in place are very, very important. And I learned about that also the hard way. So I didn't have these kinds of systems in place because the projects were smaller. But then when we started getting big projects, the only way to keep tabs and really keep track of what was going on is to install a reporting system. And that's how we became successful. And it's a different skill set. And it has to do with following quality management and quality benchmarks going forward.
That's great. That's really great insight. We have a question from somebody who's live here, which is about the topic similar to the idea of documentation of tools, so project management tools. In the course, we talk about Gantt charts, among other types of tools. In your experience, is there a certain tool that you prefer for project management, whether it's a framework for keeping track of things or an actual software that you use? This is a question from Shui Thain.
There's a ton of software programs out there. Some of them for free, some of them are subscription based, and everybody has a different preference. It depends on what kind of project you're doing, how many people you have, on what types of activities you're carrying out. So we were doing, first of all, a lot of manual things. And then we recently have moved into something more automated. So we're using Udo at the moment. It's just one system. I'm not recommending it, it's just one system. So I advise you to go look around, test the different software. And there's a lot of trials you could just do for free until you find the right one that fits you and your team. And I would do it as a teamwork. Let your team find the right system that works for them. That way you buy ownership and commitment when they are choosing the system that helps them deliver a better job.
Great. Thank you for sharing that advice. I'd like to ask another question that was surfaced from one of our learners, Atalaya Sergi, who asked you to talk a little bit about the transition of sort of bringing a project to completion and the distinction between managing a project and actually being the person implementing a certain program. So they ask, they say that they're actually doing pretty similar work to We Love Reading, and they're finding it difficult to distinguish their role as a project manager and not somebody who's actually executing on some of the programming. And was wondering if you have any suggestions on sort of how to balance being actually somebody who is managing a project at a high level and actually working with people who are doing some of the implementation on the ground.
Yeah, so that happened as well. How do you move away from implementing and just managing from afar? Well, first of all, the person you hire to do that, who's in charge of implementation, you need to be with them on a regular basis for the first period of the project, because you want to make sure that they understand the spirit, the mindset, and where you're going with this, and not just to be mechanical in executing the project. And you kind of let them you shadow them, if that makes sense, where you let them do things, but they check with you at every step in the beginning. And you explain to them that this is not because of lack of trust or lack of capabilities. It's just that you, since you used to be the one on the ground, you have a particular way of doing it because of your history, your experience, and so on. So you want to make sure that that doesn't get disconnected, and that you carry on with the same kind of vision and mission. So it's and you capitalize on it and explain it in the terms that this is a kind of mentorship, a kind of learning experience together with this person, and then slowly you hand over, right? And you praise and you give feedback at the same time. So you did a good job, but you could do this better. Let's do it this way, and you explain why you disagree with how that person did things. You have to explain. So again, it's more of a mentorship education. Like, oh no, like if you do it this way, or you write a letter this way, or you manage this way, these are the consequences that could happen, and you kind of open their eyes to a perspective that they hadn't realized, and you allow them to reach that conclusion in a very kind of organic way, so they appreciate what you've said without telling them off or telling them they're wrong. Yeah, so it's a kind of mentoring relationship.
That's great. I really like that framing as well, of sort of the collaboration and mentorship idea, between the project manager and somebody who might be implementing. We have another question which is on a similar theme. This is from a learner named Samiksha Sharma. And the idea, their question is about the frequency of communication between the project manager and the rest of the team, and the best approach to proactively communicating, and checking in, whether it's to the organization, if it's a small organization, or individually with contributors to a project. So do you have any advice to this learner or others who want to approach a status update or communication or one-on-one in an effective way?
Yeah, so first of all, I would set up weekly meetings with my team, and make it mandatory that everybody has to produce a report and discuss the challenges they face or the successes they've accomplished, all of them together. But also, I would make this regular, so everybody has something to look forward to share. But I would also meet on a one-to-one basis with everybody on the team, also regularly. Not maybe, I mean, it depends on the project, the size, and everything. But meet them as well, and listen to them, and take much longer time and give them your full attention, and allow more. If you want to share things that are confidential that maybe they don't want to talk about in front of the group, so that would be the second strategy. And the third is I always keep an open door policy. Anybody can come in, regardless of hierarchy. So we're kind of a flat organization. Anybody can come in, and I think one very important thing for a project manager is to be a good listener, and never jump to conclusions, and always give the benefit of the doubt and hear from everybody before, and then sleeping over it before taking a decision next day.
That's great advice, I think, in life and in project management.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you. We have another question from a learner who's on the live stream, Abdullahi Fagare. And their question, they point out that your background and qualification is as a molecular biologist, and was wondering what sort of qualifies you and allows you to be a successful project manager. And I think this is a great question because it's something that a lot of people working in social impact might not necessarily be project managers by trade, but because of working in a small organization, or because it's just required that they wear several hats, they perform several roles, they need to be able to effectively manage projects. So could you talk a little bit about being an effective project manager without necessarily having been trained specifically in project management?
So that's a great question. And honestly, out of experience and trial and error, I have come to realize that initially when I started the program and the organization, I was everything, right? I was the director, I was the project manager, because these were small projects, one at a time, and I had like a few employees. I was able to manage it. But as our projects got bigger, meaning we have like 30 employees, I realized that I did not have the skill set to really be the correct project manager for really big scale projects. And what I did is I had to take a decision. Do I want to learn to become a project manager, or do I want to hire the person who has those qualifications? And it's good to be honest with yourself. And there's this saying that it's the good person who admits, like, give the baking to the baker, right? And I said, I'm a visionary, I'm a leader, I can initiate things, I can inspire people, so I can be the director and direct. But to be the hands-on project manager for big scale, to me, the right decision for the program and the organization was to find a person who had been trained technically as a project manager. And that's what I did. I hired a CEO, executive officer, who set up all those systems, the software systems that I talked about. So everything was being done manually first because we were small enough. But then the CEO came in and he revamped the whole system. He put in everything, reporting systems, documentation systems, quality systems to monitor everything. And he automated everything to make it more efficient and lower cost going forward. And this change was not easy for me, because I had to take a step a little bit back. And I had to trust the person I brought in, but I was always engaging with that person to make sure that he understood my vision and where I want to go with this. And I learned a lot about project management that I hadn't realized before, because as the person who's asking, I'm a molecular biologist. I know how to do research and run a lab and things like that. And so every kind of role in life has a set of skills, and I think that it's not about learning all the skills. It's about realizing what you're good at and doing it, and what you're not good at to admit and get the right person to do the job while you oversee and engage with that person.
That's great. Thank you for a really thoughtful answer. The focus on introspection and sort of realizing strengths or weaknesses, and doing what you need to while also thinking about perhaps a better longer term solution. That's really great advice. So there's a couple of questions here from learners in the live stream about sort of what happens when a project might go wrong. So whether you join a project that is not being really successful, or whether a project comes in over budget and there needs to be a request for more funding to complete it, do you have any advice on how to navigate out of a tricky situation? So if a project isn't going according to plan, how you might right the ship and bring it to a successful completion?
So what I would suggest, I mean, depending on the problem, of course, if it's budgeting or it's like you can't find enough people or whatever the problem is, I mean, of course, the answer will differ. But in general, if there's a crisis of some sort, what I would do is I would gather everybody on the team and try to understand, what is the goal of this project? What is it? What are the deliverables that we have to achieve? And then go backwards from there, right? So if it's money, so it's costing too much money, what are those deliverables, and how can we achieve them at a lower cost? If it's about finding people, that's our deliverable. It's a deliverable, and the problem is lack of people. Then let's go backwards and see, are we recruiting the right people? Are we in the right place? So focusing on the deliverables as a project, and then working backwards with the team, so that everybody has an input, because they've been there long enough, they've been working, they can give you insight that you may not know, especially if you're coming new. So it depends where the problem is. Does that make sense in a way? So that's what I would do. So it's like working on, it's like being very efficient. You know what I mean? Or it's like by elimination, right? Focus on what's important and work backwards. Now, I don't know if this is within the context of the questions, but it relates a little bit to that question, and I think it was discussed a little bit in the course. Is that one has to distinguish between projects and a particular program, and not to be sidetracked by the project from the original purpose of the program. So, because many times you come up with a great idea, an innovation, and you create an organization to support that, but then the funders impose on you particular goals that fits their purpose and not yours. And that's navigating a thin line, which could be one of the challenges. And to me, always, 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 you focus on your goal, your innovation, and not the donors, and navigate around them and not allowing them to make you change, because your sustainability and your long-term success depends on you being focused as an organization on your innovation or your program, and not catering to the whim of every donor. And ultimately, the donors will respect you because that's how you maintain your credibility in a very focused niche of expertise.
That's a great answer. And I think actually what you just articulated, I'll use as a quick plug to our learners for our 3 fundraising courses, which actually explicitly talk about this relationship too between the funders, the donors, and the organization, and how to manage that relationship. And I think what you just talked about is a pretty common issue, and I think that's great advice for learners who might be trying to balance that. I also really like the idea that you talked about of sort of convening everybody when a project isn't going according to plan and realigning on goals and the status of the project. So that's really helpful. I think another question that came from a learner, Bahiro Hailu, is about ensuring that projects are sustainable. And I think this is a really great point as well. If you're thinking while planning a project and executing a project about its long-term sustainability, what are some of the things that you're thinking about in order to make sure that, when a project comes to an end, things don't fall apart, and the intended outcomes can continue, or can be achieved in a way that doesn't introduce any sort of thrash when the project actually ends?
So that's a great question, and very few organizations actually manage that very well. And it goes back to the point that I just made. The organization, led by whoever the leader is, has to be very focused on what are their goals, right? And that is the compass, the steering of the ship, and nothing should ever diverge the ship away from that goal, not even funding. And that is what will ensure sustainability on the long run, beyond the life of a project, a particular project, beyond the life of any donor. And it keeps everybody on board engaged, all the employees. So, for example, in one of our projects, so our organization is built around the innovation. And so any donor comes in who wants to fund, we make sure that they're funding in parallel with our goals and not for the donor's goal. And we make it very clear to the donor, by the way, very clear. But because we are so focused and clear and we hold our ground, strong people, strong organizations respect strong organizations. So they understand and they respect that. So you have to be strong and really respect yourself so they will respect you. But and for example, UNICEF came to us and said, here's $1 million. Do whatever you want, right? So I didn't even write a grant for that. But that was because we stood our ground. We were very focused and very, so we didn't have to change anything. Now, the problem that I faced is when I hired project managers. So there were 2 kinds. There was either the kind of project manager who comes from the social entrepreneurship, international NGO kind of world, where they always cater to the donor. So I had to change the mindset of that project manager that no, it's not what the donor wants. It's what we want as a goal. And we explain to the donor why we will not do what they want. And we're going to focus on what we want, because ultimately that would be serving the donor's longer term perspective. And that takes time to remove the hat of the international NGO and to keep the hat of this, very focused program. And these are like little things from let's spend every money in that budget line. And I say, no, you don't spend every money in the budget line. If you can save money from one budget line, you can do something else with it that will fulfill your goal, not the donor's goal. Then you have the other kind of project manager that comes in from business world, where it's all about the client. We have to serve the client. And the client in their mind is also the donor, but they're coming in from a client background. And no, who cares about the client? We are the ones, we have a mission and a vision, and we will explain to the client, whoever is funding the business, that we're not a business. There's something social in here. We want sustainability. Ultimately, it's a humanity kind of thing. So you have to fix the mindsets of either project manager to make sure that they're aligned before you can give them a carte blanche, so to speak, to carry on the activities and the management. Does that make sense to the question in general? Because We Love Reading started with this program. Again, it's about how you start the organization. If it's revolving around the program, then you have something to hold on to. If it's just a haphazard kind of group of people together trying to do good with no real focus, then they're going to be at the mercy of any donor who's coming along. So to ensure sustainability, you need to be focused and pick something. And sometimes that means you have to give up on other things and not be tempted to say, oh, there's a good project there, let me go do it, and so on. So I have to refuse a lot of good ideas. I write them on a paper and I say these will come at the right time, but today we have to be focused.
Yeah, that is a great and really comprehensive answer. I think that's really helpful. So I think we have just a couple of more minutes, and I want to end by asking two questions. So the first would be, what is the most challenging aspect of this work, of managing projects for a social impact organization?
I think the most challenging is keeping people on board, engaged with the objective of social impact, and that it doesn't end up as a job where you tick a box and you fill out paperwork and you go home. That's the big challenge, and that's what makes our work different from any other work. And that's what ensures sustainability, and that's what builds happiness and satisfaction in what you're doing. And you go home, you're happy. You can't wait to wake up in the morning and come to work. My staff love to come to work, and they will spend nights and evenings because there's this feeling of belonging, commitment, that you're doing something much bigger. I mean, even my finance department. So we meet once a month with the whole staff, and we call this the chaos meeting. And it's chaos because everybody can talk about anything. And we engage everybody. And I tell everybody, even the finance person, the person who opens the door, everybody has a stake in this and is getting some kind of reward because they're impacting the children and the human beings around the world. So this kind of feeling of belonging is the most important thing that you should do. And that's the challenge, I think, with most organizations, is they sometimes lose that and they just become a working machine.
That's a great point. I'd love to be a fly on the wall of the chaos meeting. It sounds like a really eventful meeting. Great. Well, I think the last question would be, Dr. Dajani, you have had a lot of success with We Love Reading in your career thus far. You've accomplished a lot, and I know that many of our learners would love to be able to ask you the question, if you have any advice for them, for aspiring social impact leaders who want to follow a similar path of, creating meaningful change in their communities or regions or in the world. What is one or a couple of pieces of advice that you have for those aspiring social impact leaders?
Trust your gut feeling, right? Trust it. If you think that you have the right solution, stick to it, trust it. Listen to others to the extent to learn from them and learn from their feedback, but not to change what you really think is right or to dampen your motivation and passion towards that thing. So that's number one. Number two, patience, and persistence. Change takes time, and what you're doing is something that's changing behavior, changing society. So it's about persistence. So they come hand in hand with the patience, right? And just never give up and just realize, okay, did it work this time? It'll work the next time, right? So it's about that long haul. You're in it for the long haul. That's why you have to be passionate and motivated. Otherwise, you just give up. Like, this is not a job for somebody who's seeking money or seeking fame. It's about somebody who feels a responsibility and that they want to make a difference in their community. So I think that's the advice I would give them. And believe me, if you believe, it's all about believing. You got a dream, and you have to believe in your dream. And if you dream and you believe in your dream, it will happen. It will happen at some point. It's not going to happen tomorrow, but at some point it will, if you believe. And if it doesn't, you just didn't believe enough. And that's, by the way, that's the chaos theory. So in physics, it's the butterfly effect. When a butterfly flutters its wings in China, there's a hurricane in the Atlantic. So our little deeds are like butterflies moving the wind a little bit, which eventually will create a change sometime in space and place where the small changes will become huge.
Well, I think that's an amazing note to end on, and it seems like the magic formula is trusting yourself, being patient, being persistent, and believing in your dream. And so I'm sure that our learners will be inspired by that message. And for all of you who joined us on this live stream and who completed the Fundamentals of Project Management course, congratulations on completing the course. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to send a quick feedback survey to the live chat. Love if anybody who's joining us would help fill that out and let us know what you thought of this, and so that we can improve for future opportunities. Dr. Dajani, thank you so much for joining us. This has been a pleasure. Thanks for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. And yeah, thank you for being featured in the course, and then for sharing your insight with our learners today. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, and I thank all the learners, and I learned a lot from these questions. Have a great day.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Safe travels, and have a great rest of your day. And to all the learners across the world, good morning and good night, and hope to see you all in the Philanthropy University community again soon.
Bye.
All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Okay.